The forest was quiet that evening, too quiet for the season. The wind carried no birdsong, no rustle of life, just the hollow sigh of the trees breathing in rhythm with the dusk. Lydia Holt pressed deeper into the woods, her boots sinking into the damp earth as though the ground itself wished to swallow her whole. The letter had told her she'd find answers here, answers about her birth, her mother, and the shadowed years that no one in the village dared to discuss. But as the mist began to rise from the forest floor, she felt as though she had walked not into a place, but into a memory. The cabin appeared suddenly, crouched between the trees like an animal waiting to pounce. Its roof sagged, its windows were opaque with grime, and yet it felt lived in, too lived in. A single candle burned in the window. Lydia froze, her breath visible in the cooling air. No one was supposed to be here. She had expected dust, silence, perhaps decay. Not light. Not presence. She stepped forward, her hand trembling as she touched the door. It creaked open before she could knock. Inside, the air smelled of lilacs and mold, sweetness rotting at the edges. On the mantel sat a single framed portrait, a young woman with Lydia's same pale eyes and auburn hair, her expression serene yet hauntingly familiar. For a moment, Lydia forgot how to breathe. The woman in the painting could have been her twin. Something moved in the next room, a faint sound, the shuffle of feet across wooden floors. Lydia called out, her voice breaking the heavy stillness. "Hello. Is anyone here?" The response came softly, almost kindly. "Yes, my dear. You've finally come home." The candle flickered violently, and the door behind her closed with a sound that felt far too deliberate. The hidden cabin sat deep within the woods, untouched by time, shrouded in a stillness that seemed to breathe with secrets. Lydia Holt had never been there before, yet the moment her boots crossed the threshold of that forest, something inside her stirred, a strange familiarity that she could neither explain nor shake off. The letter had arrived 2 weeks earlier, folded neatly in an envelope sealed with wax so brittle it cracked at her touch. It bore no return address, only her name scrawled in faded ink, and inside it, a single line that altered everything she thought she knew about her past. *, come to the cabin where your mother waits. *, the words ignited a curiosity that clawed at her sanity, because Lydia had been told her mother died during childbirth. There were no photographs, no keepsakes, nothing except that lingering sense of absence that haunted every corner of her childhood. The journey into the woods felt like a descent into another world. The air grew colder with each step, the canopy thickening overhead, blotting out the sky until it was impossible to tell how long she had been walking. Her flashlight beam caught fleeting glimpses of shapes, gnarled branches that almost looked like hands, stones carved by erosion into faces that seemed to watch her. The path narrowed, swallowed by vines, and yet she continued, driven by something beyond reason. It wasn't just curiosity anymore, it was compulsion. She felt drawn, summoned, as if the forest itself recognized her presence. When she finally saw it, the cabin appeared almost as a mirage through the mist. It was smaller than she had imagined, built of grey wood warped by weather and time. A single chimney rose from the side, releasing a faint curl of smoke that shouldn't have been possible. Lydia froze, a chill creeping through her spine. Someone was there. For a long moment, she simply stared, half expecting the vision to vanish. But the structure remained, silent and waiting, like a beast holding its breath. The closer she came, the more she noticed the carved initials on the doorframe, the small handprints pressed into the drying cement steps, and the faint hum of something electrical inside even though no wires ran this far from town. It felt wrong, and yet irresistibly right. She could sense memories brushing against her mind, echoes of laughter, the scent of baking bread, a lullaby hummed off-key. She didn't remember living them, but they belonged to her all the same. The forest had led her to this place with purpose, and the cabin seemed to know her before she even stepped inside, its windows glimmering faintly as though aware that the one it had been waiting for had finally come home. The portrait hung slightly crooked above the fireplace, its frame chipped and dulled by years of neglect, yet it commanded the room like a silent overseer. Lydia stood before it, unable to look away. The woman in the painting wore a modest ivory dress, her hair swept back in a soft wave that framed her pale face. But what unsettled Lydia most wasn't the artistry, it was the unmistakable resemblance. The same auburn hair, the same pale green eyes, even the faint birthmark near the corner of the lips that Lydia had always considered her own unique imperfection. It was like staring at an older version of herself, a ghost painted in oils, preserved in some eternal moment of quiet sorrow. The woman's gaze followed her no matter where she moved, eyes glimmering with a life that paint alone shouldn't have been able to hold. She stepped closer, her fingers trembling as she traced the edge of the frame. Beneath the thick layer of dust, she noticed something etched faintly into the wood, a set of initials. They meant nothing to her, yet the sight made her heart race. The name she bore, Holt, was her father's, but her mother's name had always been kept from her. Every time Lydia asked as a child, her father's expression would harden, and his only answer was silence. The discovery of this portrait felt like uncovering a forbidden truth that someone had gone to great lengths to erase. As she studied the image, the light from the candle flickered, casting shadows that danced across the woman's face. For a heartbeat, Lydia swore the lips in the painting parted slightly, as if to speak. She blinked, and the illusion vanished, but a faint chill lingered in her chest. It was then that she realized the fireplace beneath the portrait had recently been used. The ashes were still warm. Whoever had lived, or was living, here had tended the fire not long ago. She felt a tremor run through her as she turned in a slow circle, her gaze darting across the room. Everything appeared untouched yet maintained, the furniture covered in sheets, the scent of lavender faint beneath the rot, and a small vase of wilted flowers that hadn't yet turned to dust. She turned back to the portrait, drawn again to those eyes that seemed to see far more than they should. Her mind whispered that this woman might be her mother, that the resemblance couldn't be coincidence. But another part of her, quieter yet stronger, sensed something deeper, something wrong. The woman in the painting didn't just resemble her. She was her, reflected from another time, another life, staring back across decades as though waiting for this exact moment of recognition. That night, the cabin felt alive. The air grew heavy, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and burning wax, and each creak of the wooden floor seemed to echo louder than the last. Lydia had tried to sleep on the small cot by the window, wrapping herself in a moth-eaten blanket she'd found in the corner, but the silence was too unnatural. It wasn't the kind of quiet that brought peace, it was the kind that pressed down on the chest, that made every breath feel stolen from something else. The forest outside had gone still hours ago, no crickets, no owls, only the whisper of wind brushing against the cracked glass. She closed her eyes, willing herself to drift into sleep, but that was when she first heard it. A whisper. Soft, drawn out, and unmistakably human. At first, she thought it was the wind, the way it sometimes slipped through the seams of old wood and played tricks on tired minds. But the sound came again, clearer this time, her name carried within it like a sigh. Lydia. It was barely audible, almost gentle, but it filled her body with a cold, crawling fear. She sat up sharply, clutching the blanket against her chest, eyes sweeping the dimly lit room. The candle on the nightstand flickered violently, its flame bending as if reacting to breath. She whispered a shaky question into the dark, "Who's there?" But only silence answered, thick and mocking. Minutes passed. She tried to convince herself it had been her imagination, fatigue blending with nerves, but then she heard it once more, this time from inside the wall behind her head. The whispering grew layered, a dozen hushed voices murmuring in unison, too faint to distinguish words but too deliberate to ignore. It felt as though the house itself was speaking, timidly at first, then insistently, like it had something to confess. She pressed her ear against the wooden paneling, heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear over it. Beneath the hollow timbre of the wood, she caught phrases, fragmented, desperate. "Remember, find me, come home." Her fingers brushed the wall, and she felt a vibration beneath the surface, as though something moved behind it. The sensation sent a shock through her body. She stumbled backward, eyes locked on the paneling as the whispers subsided, replaced by one final, distinct breath that seemed to form right beside her ear. "You left me." The words were neither angry nor pleading, just full of unbearable sadness. Lydia froze, unable to breathe, her reflection quivering in the darkened window. The cabin had begun to remember her, and somewhere within its walls, something she had forgotten was trying to speak back. Morning arrived reluctantly, grey light filtering through the torn curtains like a hesitant intruder. Lydia barely noticed, she had not slept. The whispers had faded just before dawn, leaving behind an echo that clung to her thoughts like smoke. She felt compelled to search, to find proof that what she'd heard was real and not just the fevered tricks of an anxious mind. Her eyes caught a glint beneath the edge of a warped floorboard near the fireplace. Kneeling down, she pried it open with trembling hands, revealing a hollow space lined with dust and age. Inside lay a small, leather-bound book, its cover cracked and softened by time, the edges blackened as if it had once been rescued from flame. The initials EH were embossed faintly in gold on the front, the same letters she'd seen carved into the portrait frame. When she opened it, the first pages were filled with elegant handwriting, delicate and looping, ink faded but legible. The entries began innocently enough, descriptions of the forest, the scent of rain, a woman writing about her solitude. But as Lydia turned the pages, the tone changed. The handwriting grew hurried, the words tangled with emotion and fear. Phrases repeated, confessions hidden within metaphors that soon became more direct. The writer spoke of a love forbidden by law and by God, a union formed in secret and sealed in blood. "He is my world," one line read, "and yet he is my curse. We are back." The shop felt suddenly suffocating. Lydia froze, her breath catching in her throat. Slowly, she lifted her hand, and the reflection did the same, but with a lag, a heartbeat's delay that felt like eternity. The mirror rippled faintly, as though water shimmered across its surface. Her pulse quickened, dread thickening in her stomach. Then, without warning, her reflection smiled. Lydia didn't. The expression that stared back at her was wrong, too knowing, too calm. Her hand trembled, but she couldn't look away. The reflected version of herself tilted its head, lips parting soundlessly before mouthing a word she couldn't quite hear. Lydia leaned closer, her ear inches from the glass, and a whisper slipped through, not from behind her, but from inside the mirror itself. The voice was soft and familiar, almost comforting, yet it carried a weight that made her skin prickle. "Remember," it said. "You've been here before." The reflection moved again, this time raising its hand to point somewhere behind Lydia. She turned sharply, but there was nothing, only the darkened cabin, the faint smell of smoke, and the sound of her own shallow breathing. When she faced the mirror again, her reflection no longer mimicked her. It stood perfectly still, even as she reached out toward it. For a brief, dreadful moment, she saw something else flicker behind her mirrored self, an older man's silhouette, his face hidden but his hand resting gently on her reflection's shoulder. Lydia stumbled back, the candle tipping over and extinguishing in a hiss. The cabin plunged into darkness, and the glass surface caught the faint glimmer of moonlight. For a second, she saw the man's face clearly, eyes hollow, lips curved in a faint smile that mirrored the one her reflection had worn. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the image faded, leaving only her terrified reflection staring back. Lydia reached up and touched the glass, and for an instant, it felt warm, like the pulse of another being trapped just beyond her reach, waiting for her to remember the bond she was never meant to see. The following morning broke under a shroud of grey mist that seemed to seep into the cabin itself. Lydia felt hollow, her thoughts fractured by what she had seen in the mirror. She needed proof, something tangible that could explain away the madness tightening its grip around her. The diary had mentioned a name, an ancestor who had vanished after the scandal of the Forbidden Union, and Lydia clung to it as a lifeline. She searched through the drawers, the shelves, and the wooden chest at the foot of the bed until her hand brushed against a bundle of old documents wrapped in cloth. They were brittle, eaten by time, but as she carefully unfolded them, she realized they were fragments of a family record, written in the same elegant hand she'd seen in the diary. The papers detailed births, deaths, and marriages spanning generations, but something about the lineage made her stomach turn. The same surnames repeated, intertwining in ways that defied reason. It wasn't just coincidence, it was pattern, a deliberate cycle that echoed through time. Names crossed out, rewritten, and reappearing decades later. Lydia's eyes caught on one name in particular, Eleanor Holt, the woman from the portrait. Below it, in faded ink, was written daughter, Lydia. But the year of birth was centuries before her own. The impossible detail made her throat go dry. The handwriting continued below, scrawled hastily as if added later, reborn to continue what was never broken. Her pulse raced as she flipped through the other papers. Some were letters written by villagers, their tone fearful, accusing the Holt family of witchcraft, of meddling in unnatural rites. One described how the first Holt daughter was said to have died and returned in another form, always drawn back to the same bloodline, always carrying the curse of her origin. Lydia's hands trembled as she pieced the story together. She wasn't just related to the woman in the portrait, she was her, reborn through generations, the living echo of that forbidden child. The air around her thickened as though the cabin itself acknowledged her realization. The walls groaned softly, and for a fleeting moment, she swore she could hear faint laughter, feminine, distant, and achingly familiar. She felt dizzy, her vision swimming with flashes of images that weren't hers, a wedding in candlelight, a man's hand clutching hers too tightly, a baby's cry echoing in the dark. Her heart pounded with the knowledge that she carried not only their blood but their unfinished story, their sin perpetuated through her very existence. She wasn't merely uncovering her ancestry, she was the continuation of it, a vessel through which the past refused to die. The realization didn't just terrify her, it felt inevitable, as if her entire life had been leading her back to this revelation, to this house, to the truth buried in her veins. The forest had grown darker that evening, the kind of darkness that felt sentient, aware of every breath Lydia took. She had spent the day pacing the cabin, unable to shake the weight of what she had learned. The documents, the mirror, the diary all pointed to something impossible, something that defied time and reason. Yet the unease that pulsed through her veins wasn't just fear, it was expectation, as though something or someone was approaching. When the first knock echoed against the cabin door, soft but deliberate, she froze. No one had come this deep into the woods since she arrived. The knock came again, louder, followed by a voice that sent a chill racing down her spine. "Lydia," it said, low and steady, a man's voice that carried familiarity she couldn't explain. "It's time to come home." Her body went rigid. The sound was neither hostile nor kind, it was intimate, the way one might speak to someone beloved and long lost. She crept toward the door, her heart thudding painfully, and pressed her ear against the wood. Silence. Then, a slow dragging sound across the porch, as if boots were scraping against the old boards. She whispered a shaky, "Who are you?" But the answer came not as words, rather as breath, a sigh that seemed to seep through the cracks. "You know me," the voice murmured. "You've always known me." Lydia stumbled backward, her eyes darting toward the window. Through the fogged glass, she saw movement, a figure standing just beyond the tree line, tall and still, its outline barely visible through the mist. The figure didn't move closer, didn't call again, only stood there, watching. The longer she stared, the more she thought she could make out his features, a man's face, stern yet gentle, framed by hair streaked with gray. Something inside her stirred at the sight, an ache of recognition she couldn't deny. The image overlapped in her mind with one from the mirror, from the memories that weren't hers, a man holding her hand by firelight, whispering promises he should never have made. The air inside the cabin thickened, the candle flames bending toward the door as though drawn by invisible breath. Lydia heard the voice once more, this time closer, as if spoken beside her ear. "You are mine, my daughter, my bride. You cannot run from what you are." Her body went cold, her pulse hammering as she turned to the door again. The latch trembled. The air outside seemed to hum. She backed away slowly, realizing that whatever waited beyond that threshold wasn't a stranger, it was the one who had been waiting for her return, bound to her by blood, by memory, and by the curse that refused to die with him. Lydia stood in the center of the cabin, her pulse beating like a drum against her ribs as the air grew thick and charged around her. The voice outside had fallen silent, but its presence hadn't faded, it lingered, pressing against the walls, seeping through the cracks like cold mist. The candlelight flickered violently, shadows bending and twisting as though alive. She knew she couldn't stay much longer, something was coming, something inevitable. The whispers had returned, not from the walls this time, but from within her own mind, voices that sounded like her own yet carried the weight of generations. They urged her in opposite directions, some pleading with her to leave, to run before it was too late, others coaxing her to open the door, to embrace what she was destined to become. Her trembling hands reached for the diary on the table, its pages fluttering in an unseen wind. She flipped to the last entry again, the frantic scrawl she had nearly memorized by now. "If she comes back, She must remember who she is before he finds her. Before the bond repeats. The warning was no longer just ink, it was prophecy. Lydia understood then that every woman born from this bloodline had faced the same choice: to break the curse or surrender to it, to flee from the man who called himself both father and husband, or to become him's bride in the endless cycle of sin that the forest had fed for centuries. The door creaked, just slightly, and a figure's shadow stretched across the wooden floor. She felt his presence before she saw him, the scent of earth and smoke curling through the air. "Lydia," the voice whispered again, softer now, tender, almost pleading. "You've run long enough. It's time to remember." The sound of those words filled her with both terror and yearning, a pull deep in her chest that she couldn't resist. Memories she never lived began flashing behind her eyes, arms wrapping around her, a kiss against her forehead, a promise whispered in the dark. They weren't hers, yet they felt so achingly familiar. She took a step toward the door, then stopped, trembling. The mirror across the room caught her reflection once more, but this time it wasn't alone. The figure stood behind her, his hands resting gently on her shoulders, his face now clear, aged but kind, his eyes filled with sorrow rather than malice. "You cannot escape what you are," he murmured, and for a moment, she almost believed him. Her breath came shallow and quick as she realized the truth. To open the door meant surrender, to leave meant defiance. The forest seemed to hold its breath as she reached out her hand, caught between blood and freedom, between the life she remembered and the one she had been born to repeat.